Berkeley and Solipsism by Felipe Bautista. Berkeley famously insisted that esse est percipi aut percipere. The chief problem, however, is that, insofar as it actually is the case that esse est percipi aut percipere, taking for granted that it actually is the case that esse est percipi aut percipere, that is, then I have no grounds whatsoever to affirm the being either of other minds, whether other finite minds, or an eternal mind, or the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses. Of course, the continued existence vis being of objects after they no longer appear to the senses goes hand in hand, at least in the context of a Berkeleyan metaphysics, with the being of other minds, whether finite or eternal. Viz., for though we hold indeed the objects of sense to be nothing else but ideas which cannot exist unperceived, yet we may not hence conclude they have no existence except only while they are perceived by us, viz. By myself, since there may be some other spirit that perceives them though we, viz. Though I, do not. If it actually is the case that esse est percipi aut percipere, then I must concede that I have zero grounds to affirm the being of other minds, finite or eternal, and hence zero grounds to affirm the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses, because I can perceive only ideas which cannot exist unperceived, to use Berkeleyan language. And I cannot in principle, even on Berkeleyan terms, perceive anything besides my own ideas which cannot exist unperceived. Because what do we perceive besides our own ideas or sensations? If I cannot perceive anything besides my own ideas or sensations, and if I eo ipso do not, and cannot, perceive other minds, finite or eternal, then, and this is my point, I have no warrant to affirm the being of other minds, finite or eternal, and hence no warrant to affirm the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses. By what argument, Hume beseeches us, can it be proved that the perceptions of the mind must be caused by 1. External objects entirely different from them, though resembling them, if that be possible, and could not arise either from 2. The energy of the mind itself, or from 3. The suggestion of some invisible and unknown spirit, or from 4. Some other cause still more unknown to us. I cannot sufficiently substantiate any hypothesis of the being of other minds beyond myself, finite or eternal, a priori, because it is not logically necessary that other minds, finite or eternal, have being. Each of Hume's mentioned scenarios is a logical possibility, such that even solipsism, viz., from the energy of the mind itself, is a logical possibility. If I cannot sufficiently substantiate any hypothesis affirming the being of other minds beyond myself, finite or eternal, a priori, then eo ipso I must do so a posteriori. However, this will not work because, as Hume reminds us, it is a question of fact whether the perceptions of the senses be produced by external objects resembling them. How shall this question be determined? By experience surely, as all other questions of a like nature. But here, experience is, and must be, entirely silent. The mind has never anything present to it but the perceptions, and cannot possibly reach any experience of their connection with objects or alleged other subjects. The supposition of such a connection is, therefore, without any foundation in reasoning. Indeed, I cannot at all sufficiently substantiate any affirmation of the being of other minds beyond myself a posteriori because, to once again cite Hume's legitimate observation, that our senses offer not their impressions as the images of something distinct or independent and external is evident, because they convey to us nothing but a single perception and never give us the least intimation of anything beyond. A single perception can never produce the idea of a double existence, but by some inference either of the reason or imagination. When the mind looks farther than what immediately appears to it, its conclusions can never be put to the account of the senses, and it certainly looks farther when, from a single perception, it infers a double existence, and supposes the relations of resemblance and causation betwixt them. To begin with the senses, tells us David Hume, 'tis evident these faculties are incapable of giving rise to the notion of the continued existence of their objects, after they no longer appear to the senses. For that is a contradiction in terms, and supposes that the senses continue to operate, even after they have ceased all manner of operation. Now, Berkeley tells us that, consequently, so long as they, viz., the objects of the senses, are not actually perceived by me, or do not exist in my mind, or that of any other created spirit, they must either have no existence at all, or else subsist in the mind of some eternal spirit. Yet, as we've seen, it is the very being of any other created spirit, or of some eternal spirit, which can be sufficiently substantiated neither a priori nor a posteriori, and hence all affirmation of such being, viz., affirmation of the being of other minds, finite or eternal, amounts to petitio principii, and non sequitur too, insofar as inferred from the account of the senses. When the mind looks farther than what immediately appears to it, its conclusions can never be put to the account of the senses. Not only is it logically possible that the objects of the senses have no continued existence after they no longer appear to the senses, but it is logically possible that what I perceive as and call people are nothing more than my own ideas which cannot exist unperceived. By what argument can it be proved that the perceptions of the mind must be caused by 1. External objects entirely different from them, though resembling them, if that be possible, and could not arise either from 2. The energy of the mind itself, or from 3. The suggestion of some invisible and unknown spirit, or from 4. Some other cause still more unknown to us. Now, of course, Berkeley may insist that I can infer the being of other minds through analogy with my own conscious experience. Yet, such an insistence would involve ignoratio elenchi against my analysis hitherto, because the issue is not concerning what I can infer, but concerning what I can sufficiently substantiate a priori or a posteriori, to say nothing of the fact that even any inferences I may have amount to my own ideas which cannot exist unperceived. Even if I infer the being of other minds, the question remains concerning whether I can sufficiently substantiate the actual being of other minds a priori or a posteriori. And as we've seen, I cannot. And hence, such an inference would amount only to the petitio principii and non sequitur already aforementioned. Because I can think of or infer that X exists independently of my mental activity, it simply does not follow that X does exist beyond my mental activity. Hence, the petitio principii and the non sequitur. A single perception can never produce the idea of a double existence. The chief question, therefore, is whether Berkeley actually commits himself to the reality of other minds, finite or eternal, beyond myself. If he does, if these are necessary for his broader metaphysics, then he begs the question and engages in non sequitur, as we've seen. If he does not, if he regards the reality of these only hypothetically, that is, and if these are not necessary for his broader metaphysical enterprise, then any assertion of the reality of either other finite minds or an eternal mind beyond myself remains without any foundation in reasoning, petitio principii and non sequitur all the same. If Berkeley treats other minds as merely hypothetical, then he cannot rightly be accused either of begging the question or of non sequitur, because he is not affirming anything and only entertaining a hypothesis. The question, of course, arises concerning the centrality of Berkeley's position of an eternal spirit relative to his broader metaphysical enterprise. After all, the very subtitle of Berkeley's treatise is Wherein the Chief Causes of Error and Difficulty in the Sciences, with the grounds of skepticism, atheism, and irreligion, are inquired into. Does Berkeleyan metaphysics necessarily involve and require the being of other minds, whether finite or eternal? Or is a mild version of Berkeleyan subjectivism available, one which remains agnostic concerning the being of other minds, and eo ipso concerning the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses, and even agnostic concerning Hume's four scenarios? Upon the whole, remarked Berkeley, I am inclined to think that the far greater part, if not all, of those difficulties which have hitherto amused philosophers and blocked up the way to knowledge are entirely owing to ourselves, that we have first raised a dust and then complain we cannot see. But, perhaps, we may be too partial to ourselves in placing the fault originally in our faculties, and not rather in the wrong use we make of them. Perhaps the assertion of the being of other minds, and of the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses, is only so much learned dust. If I cannot sufficiently substantiate either a priori or a posteriori the being of other minds, finite or eternal, or the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses, then I must revolve in a perpetual circle, viz. Petitio principii, insofar as I take for granted the being of other minds, finite or eternal, which revolving only dizzies me, and raises a learned dust about me. That our senses offer not their impressions as the images of something distinct, or independent and external, is evident, because they convey to us nothing but a single perception and never give us the least intimation of anything beyond. A single perception can never produce the idea of a double existence, but by some inference either of the reason or imagination. When the mind looks farther than what immediately appears to it, its conclusions can never be put to the account of the senses, and it certainly looks farther when, from a single perception, it infers a double existence, and supposes the relations of resemblance and causation betwixt them. The supposition of such a connection is, therefore, without any foundation in reasoning. It should be noted that it does not follow that, because speculative reason is insufficient to substantiate the constitutive being of other minds, whether finite or eternal, I cannot uphold the regulative validity of the idea of other minds on the basis of practical reason. Just as Kant argued that certain ideas, like freedom, immortality, and God, could be justified through practical reason despite lying beyond the reach of speculative reason, we might similarly justify belief in other minds as a practical necessity while maintaining theoretical agnosticism about their constitutive being. Summa summarum, if it is the case that esse est percipi aut percipere, then the question remains without an answer concerning whether there actually are other minds beyond myself, finite or eternal. Nor can I beg the question and simply take the being of these for granted. Nor can I appeal to the account of the senses here, as such would entail non sequitur. Nor can the question be satisfactorily answered either a priori or a posteriori, such that any answer to such question, whether affirmative or negative, must be nothing more than petitio principii and non sequitur, inescapably. In turn, if the question concerning the being of other minds, finite or eternal, cannot possibly be satisfactorily answered, then I have zero basis whatsoever to sufficiently substantiate any hypothesis, affirmative or negative, concerning the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses. The continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses, insofar as it actually is the case that esse est percipi aut percipere, inescapably depends on the actual being of other minds beyond myself, finite or eternal. And if I cannot legitimately pronounce either an affirmation or a negation concerning the being of other minds, finite or eternal, without thereby begging the question and engaging in non sequitur, then I cannot legitimately pronounce either an affirmation or a negation concerning the continued existence of objects after they no longer appear to the senses. A single perception, indeed, can never produce the idea of a double existence. Viz., I cannot bridge the gap between my immediate perceptions and claims about existence beyond those perceptions without inevitably thereby arguing in a circle and also committing egregious non sequitur, whether those claims are about the alleged being of other minds or about objects' continued existence when they no longer appear to the senses. It is indeed an opinion strangely prevailing amongst men that houses, mountains, rivers, and in a word, all sensible objects, including men themselves, have an existence, natural or real, distinct from their being perceived by the understanding. But with how great an assurance and acquiescence soever this principle may be entertained in the world, yet whoever shall find in his heart to call it in question may, if I mistake not, perceive it to involve a manifest contradiction. For, what are the forementioned objects but the things we perceive by sense? And what do we perceive besides our own ideas or sensations? And is it not plainly repugnant that any one of these, or any combination of them, should exist unperceived? Obiter dicta. Whether you are asleep in bed and dreaming, or you awake to find yourself in bed, in each case, the environment you encounter is nothing more than the network of your thoughts. For, as wrote Kant, all bodies, together with the space in which they are, must be considered nothing but mere representations in us, and exist nowhere but in our thoughts. In each case, the environment you encounter, dream environment or bedroom, involves only appearances which are the reflections that arise on the surface of the mind. In neither case can you possibly interact with things in themselves, that is, it's just you, caught up in perpetual dream. Namely, the mind has never anything present to it but the perceptions. A single perception can never produce the idea of a double existence. But, of course, if reflections, the question arises of what these are reflections of. If the mind be taken to be a mirror, figuratively speaking, that is. The point is that even questions, thoughts, and convictions are instances of these reflections too. What about time? What about apparent succession, change, and duration? Well, it is no crime to grant empirical reality to time while granting to it no transcendental reality and giving to it instead a transcendental ideality. To begin with the senses, 'tis evident these faculties are incapable of giving rise to the notion of the continued existence of their objects after they no longer appear to the senses. For that is a contradiction in terms, and supposes that the senses continue to operate, even after they have ceased all manner of operation.